Okay, folks, so this unit will be the colonial period ending with the First Great Awakening. So we're going to be last lecture for this unit, the First Great Awakening. A few things I'm going to touch on first, just a few last facts before we move forward. Some things that we might have already touched on, but I just want to review them again. Other colonial facts, some of you may already have this. If not, that's okay. First off, we talked about how 90% of the colonists were living in what part of the country? Rural or agricultural areas, right? Or farms. So just be aware that the majority of these colonists were still living on farms and they're not living in cities yet. Is the same true today? No, the majority of people are living in cities, urban areas, or suburban areas. So you should be familiar with this. Have we covered this already?
Yes.
Okay. You should also be familiar with a book that came out by Benjamin Franklin called Poor Richard's Almanac. Again, most of you should have this already, right? We did this already as well. Poor Richard's Almanac, Benjamin Franklin, again, farmer's advice, homely advice. The basic idea, it was supposed to help farmers know when to plant their crops. It was supposed to let farmers know when the best time was to, sow their seeds. It was also like some basic advice for people. Early to bed, early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. Guests and fish stink within 3 days. The early bird catches the worm, that kind of stuff. So just helpful hints, stories, whatever else. So that's Benjamin Franklin and Poor Richard's Almanac, a very famous book of its time. Again, here's Benjamin Franklin, amazingness, fighting Zeus. So that's always awesome. Story of the kite, whatever else, here he is. And then, of course, Cotton Mather. This should be new for most of you. Cotton Mather, he is also renowned because he developed something called smallpox inoculation for the colonies. Have we done Cotton Mather already? No, there should be new. So Cotton Mather introduced something called smallpox inoculation. Pretty much he was creating vaccines for the colonists. And you guys know what vaccines are, right?
Yes.
So pretty much what Cotton Mather would do was that he would inject the colonists with the vaccine in order to prevent smallpox from inflicting the world. And I don't mean like he's randomly stabbing people with a syringe and be like, you, and then smallpox. Do you guys understand how a vaccine works, by the way? What is a vaccine? It's a weakened form of the virus, right? So they'll take the virus. Today they might boil it and then to weaken it and then they'll inject you with the virus. The hopes being that what? Yeah, if I put a weakened virus in you, your body should be able to defeat it. Well, that's what Cotton Mather did. He would take a cart around town with him. There'd be people that were afflicted with smallpox in the cart, and they'd have boils all over them, because that's what, chicken pox is, right? Smallpox was much worse, painful boils all over the body. He would take a syringe, or not really a syringe, he would take a stick, poke the boil until it burst, and get smallpox pus all over the stick. And by the way, you guys know what pus is, right? It's like dead virus or weakened virus. So he would wrap that pus all over the stick. He would go to a person, take a knife, cut them, and then just kind of wipe that stick into their wound and be like, now you got smallpox, good luck. And then they would walk away, and then hopefully that person would survive. They would still get sick, but hopefully they would survive that infection, right? It didn't always work, but did it work most of the time? Yes, and that's why it was very effective. It still works today, guys. When you guys get a flu vaccination or a measles vaccination, you get sick for some of you, right? Some of you don't, many of you do. You get sick for a while and then you're better. That's because we're literally giving you a virus. But he saved a lot of lives, Cotton Mather. Questions there? You should also know John Peter Zenger. John Peter Zenger, you should know John Peter Zenger because he established the freedom of the press. He established the freedom of the press. Basically, John Peter Zenger was a newspaper reporter, and he reported that the governor of New York was super corrupt and he was doing corrupt things. And so what happened was that he reported it in the newspaper and the governor had him arrested. And the judge said, you can't arrest him because what he reported about you sounded bad, especially if it's true, right? So you can't, just because it makes you look bad doesn't mean you can arrest him. Now, if he lied, could he have him arrested? Sure, you can't lie, but if what you're saying is true, do you have every right to say it? Sure you do. So that's pretty much what happened. It established the freedom of the press. It established the freedom of the press, which is really good for him. So freedom of the press was established for John Peter Zenger, and that's established for us today. By the way, what is it called when you just blatantly lie in the media about something? You know what that's called? Libel. Very good. So libel. That's when you blatantly straight up lie about someone in the media. So, yeah, that's just what happens. Anyway, good there. All right. So let's talk about the First Great Awakening. The first question that we should ask ourselves then is this. Why was religion declining? That's the first question to answer today. Why was religion declining? Why was religion declining? And I'll answer that question for you. Why was religion declining in America? The first reason why religion was declining in America was first, younger generations were less pious or less moral. Younger generations were less pious or less moral. Younger generations were less pious or less moral. So if you think about it, folks, think about, you and your grandmother, and between the two of you, who was more religious, you or your grandmother? Your grandmother was. And then your parents were a little bit less, and then you were a little bit less, and your kids might be a little bit less, and then one day will someone go right back to the church? Sure, and then will that slowly step away again a little bit each year, each generation? That's just the way things work, right? It's like, oh, I'm not going to do what my parents did. I'm not going to do what my parents did. And slowly but surely your parents do nothing. Don't go to church anymore and be like, ooh, I'm not going to be an atheist. I'm going to go to church. So your rebellion is going back to church. And then it starts the whole cycle all over again. So really the way it works is that with each successive generation, the younger generations became less pious or less moral. Does that make sense? That's just the way things work. The second reason why religion became less important in America was the Enlightenment. And what did the Enlightenment ask us to do? Question. So we began to question religion. And not to question whether or not there was a God, but whether to question if my religion was correct, right? So that's what they began to question. They began to question everything. Religion, if this was the right way to practice, was this guy right, was he wrong? Religion, enlightening, questioning. The third reason, westward expansion. I mean, people are literally moving further and further and further west. And the further west you move, the further away you're going to be from what? The church. And so the further you are from the church, imagine that you moved out west. What's the first thing you're going to build? A house. And then you're a subsistence farmer, so what are you going to do next? Farm. And then next year, what are you going to do? Farm. And next year you're going to farm. And next year you're going to farm. So are you going to find any time to build church for yourself? No. And so it's not like they didn't want to be religious, but they realized, okay, it's either I survive or I pray to God and I want to survive. So I'll be religious, but am I going to be super religious? Am I going to have someone watching over me, holding me accountable for my faith? No. And so that westward movement literally moved them away from the church. I mean, they were literally distanced from the church. The fourth reason, diversity, or religious diversity. If there are like 50 religions in the colonies, what are you going to think? If there are 50 different religions in the colonies and you're one of them, what's going on in your mind? Yes, question.
Maybe you're not following the right.
Yeah, what if you're wrong? There are 49 other religions. So how do I know that I'm right? Because my mom said so? But she was wrong about that cheese last week. What else? And so really you begin that questioning again. That religious diversity causes doubt. That religious diversity causes questioning. The fifth reason, society became more materialistic. And again, that's true because society got younger, right? With each successive generation, did we become less and less strict with our morals? So money became more important, especially even in New England. The Puritans might have been the strictest, but after 100 years, are some of those people going to be straying away from the Puritan faith? Yes. They might still consider themselves Puritan, but they're like, but I think it's okay to make an extra $100 on the side every so often. And then their kids are like, oh, maybe it's okay to make an extra $1,000 on the side. That's okay, right? I'm still going to church. I'm still a good person. I'm still going to church all the time. And so they began to stretch their faith to fit their lifestyle. Okay, that's what's happening in this new generation. The sixth reason, and this is specific to Puritans. This is specific for Puritans. But what happened was that the children of the elect did not inherit electhood, which is not a real word, but I don't know how else to describe it. The children of the elect did not inherit electhood. So just because you guys are elect, does that mean your children are going to be elect? So is it possible that you might go to heaven, but your children might not? And so, are you going to be okay with a religion that might cast your children into hell? No. And here's the thing about the Puritan faith. You can't go to Puritan church if you're not elect. So all these parents are going to church and getting their souls saved, and their children aren't allowed to come. And so their children are going to be damned. And so are they okay with that? So that's a problem. More Puritans are leaving the Puritan church because their children are not guaranteed salvation. That's a problem. Now, one quick fix that they tried, by the way, the Puritans did try to fix this problem with something called the halfway covenant. And the idea behind the halfway covenant was that they would give children partial membership to the church. They'd give them partial membership to the church, which means you can come to the church. That doesn't mean you're elect yet. But you can at least attend the church, and then we'll do the tests later to see if you're elect or not. But at least they gained partial membership to the church. Because again, I don't know if I described this in detail last time, but to be elect, you had to go over a series of tests to see if you were elect. They ask you questions about your life, the luck you've had, your faith in God, whatever else. And based on that interview, they would determine if you were elect or not. And if you weren't deemed elect yet, even as a kid, they might say, okay, maybe you're not elect right now, but you will be in the future. So we're going to give you partial membership for now. And then maybe we'll find out you're elect in the future. Make sense? Okay. The seventh reason why people began to move away from the church, also, this is the more interesting one, but these are all equally important, but this is what I find most interesting. The Salem witch trials. The Salem witch trials of 1692. So the other reason why people began to move away from the church are the Salem witch trials of 1692. So you guys ready to talk about the Salem witch trials? Yep. Let's do so. So Salem witch trials began in 1692. And pretty much the Salem witch trials were when what was happening? Women were being accused of being witches, right? So you guys should know this. Women were accused of being witches. Here's why they might be accused. And you can write just a few of these down as to why they might be accused. Number one, if they acted strangely. I know that's vague, but that's one reason why you might accuse a woman of being a witch. Another reason why you might accuse a woman of being a witch, refusing men's advances. So, you know, a guy walks up to a woman and says, "Hey, you want to go out with me tonight?" And she says, "No, I'm not going to go out with you." And he goes, "You're a witch! How could you deny this? You must be a witch! Everyone would love to go out with me." And so that would be a good reason to accuse someone of being a witch. If a woman was outspoken, she might be a witch. So, you know, women were supposed to be meek and timid and quiet. So if a woman was like, "I'm not going to do what you tell me just because you're a man," you're a witch, not a feminist. You're a witch. So that might happen. And then if they lived alone, they might be a witch. So again, for all these reasons and more, women were accused of being witches. Now, here's the problem. Women were accused without evidence, by what we would determine as evidence. They were accused without evidence. Instead, they were accused with rumor, suspicion, and lies, which again does not hold up in court today. But women were accused without evidence. Instead, they used rumor, suspicion, and lies. By the way, gentlemen, this doesn't apply today, so you can't like ask a girl out, and if she says no, you can't accuse her of being a witch. Okay? You're not allowed to do that. In any case, here are examples of evidence. You don't have to write these down, but I find these just to be fascinating. The first example of evidence is something called spectral evidence. This is for your own purposes. You can tell your family later. Spectral evidence. Spectral evidence meant that you could see the ghost of the witch inflicting harm. So again, normally these would be little girls that they believed to be pure, and if they believed there was a witch, and say like, Sadie was like, "Oh, this is painful, there's a witch, it's hurting me." And then the little girl would be like, "Yes, I see the witch, she's there, and it looks just like Amalia." And it'd be like, "Oh my God, it was Amalia the whole time." But is that evidence? No, but this little girl said it, and who are we to judge the imagination of 9-year-old? And yet that was evidence back then. And then, of course, if that one little girl saw it, what happened to all the other 5 little girls? They would see it too, because they're like, "Oh, if she sees it, I see it too now. Oh no, it was Amalia. Oh, she's flying around. Oh no." Imagination. Just spectacular. Unless you're damning someone to death, then it's not so good. The second example, witch cake. Witch cake. Like literally, witch cake. What would happen is, let's say like a woman was being, hurt by a witch again. What would happen is they would take that girl that was being hurt by the witch and they would make her pee in a bowl. And then they would take that urine and turn it into a cake. And they would use that cake and they would feed it to a dog. And then as the dog was chomping on that urine, they expected to hear the witch screaming in pain, because the belief was that the witch's urine still had these ties of these webs of impurity still attached to the witch's soul. And as the dog chomped as those veins, the woman might be like, "Oh no, it's so painful, ah!" So like if a woman fell off a ladder at the time that the dog was eating the witch cake by accident, it'd be like, "Witch! She's in pain!" At the time the dog was eating the witch cake, which might be just a complete random coincidence. Like, you fell off the ladder because you felt the pain of the dog and the witch cake. Ha ha! Evidence! The touch test was also a really good example. The idea behind the touch test was that when a witch touched you, she might put her venom inside you. Thus, you were suffering the witch's poison. So the idea was the girl that was suffering would like sit on like a chair or a table, and then they would have random people come and touch them. And if they touched them, the venom should go back into their bodies. And so this parade of people would go and touch the person. And if that person was still sick, they clearly weren't the witch. And if the witch touched them and they stopped being hurt, she was the witch. Now here's the problem. It's not like the girl was blindfolded or anything. So if she already believed that someone was a witch, could she just feel instantly better when that person touched her? Of course. And so in the first few times we tried this, the girl was completely not blindfolded. She could see everything and be like, oh, I feel better. Yeah, it was you the whole time. But once we blindfolded them, did it become less accurate? Of course. And they're like, this is not as accurate as we believe to be. Otherwise, other examples were testimony of other witches. Like, hey, look, we can either burn you at the stake or cut off your head. Which would you prefer? If you tell us who the other witches are in your group, then we'll just cut off your head. But if you don't tell us who else you know, we're going to burn you alive. Like, oh, it was Enrique, and it was Juan, it was Luis. It was those the entire time. So they would lie, and those people would also be burned at the stake or hung. They would investigate their house. They'd look for books like puppets. Like puppets might be used for like voodoo, whatever. So again, are these good pieces of evidence at all? No. Not at all. But despite that, over 200 were accused. Over 200 were accused. Over 150 went to jail. And 19 women were hung. Over that evidence that we just talked about. 150 jailed, 19 women were hung, plus 2 dogs and 1 male. That's who was killed as a result of Salem witch trials. In 1696, the church realized, oh crap. Because what did the church realize in 1696? They were wrong. So in 1696, the church admitted their mistake. In 1696, the church admitted their mistake. But the damage had already been done. Because what are your thoughts when the church in 1696 says, oh yeah, so that whole Salem witch trial thing, yeah, we were wrong about that. What are you thinking? What else are you wrong about? Because is that a really big thing to be wrong about? Yes. So that creates significant doubt. Makes sense for everyone. Yes. So for all 7 of those reasons, people left the church. Good so far. Thus the Great Awakening, First Great Awakening begins in the 1730s and 40s. In the 1730s and 40s, what happened? The 1730s and 40s, what happened was a religious revival. The idea is that they wanted to bring people back to the church. It's a religious revival of bringing people back to the church. And so the way they did this in the 1730s and 40s in this religious revival is that they introduced a new group of preachers called the New Lights. These were the new kind of preachers, and Jonathan Edwards was one of them. Okay? These new preachers were called New Lights. And the idea was that these new lights were supposed to give these new types of sermons called Jeremiads. And Jeremiads were emotional, critical, dramatic. I mean, these were some of the most dramatic sermons you can imagine. Because before the New Lights, church was very much like, so you all know that God loves you and you should do what God says every day. So that's it for today. God be with you on your way. But that wasn't very interesting. But with the New Light and the Jeremiads, theirs was a lot more like, you are teetering on the brink of hell, and the only reason why you haven't fallen into that chasm of fire is God's hand has reached out and saved you. And at any moment, he could pull his hand away. And you deserve to burn. But God has chosen to save you. And what are you going to do to redeem his grace? What? We all know you're sinners. Everyone knows what you did. And he'd call people out in church. And be like, everyone knows what you did on Saturday. And the town would know. And it was interesting. And people would come to church and be like, oh my gosh, what are we going to learn today about the town? But it was like a novella. It was like very interesting and dramatic. And so would that attract people to come back to church? It also brought people back to church because they were afraid about their own salvation. This guide made them afraid not to go to church. Another good example was George Whitefield. He also created this drama to go to church. You know, the idea that you can escape this pain of sin, you can escape the pains of hell. All you need to do is look inside yourself to find salvation and free your burdens. That's where God will come in your lives. And people are like, oh my gosh, I should go back to church, because if not, I'm going to go to hell. So that was really influential for a lot of people as well. So you kind of have that going on. Well, in any case, the significance of the Great Awakening then. Lasting effects of the Great Awakening. The first is that it promoted a personal relationship with God. 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 And because of that, it also resulted in a democratization of religion. Because folks, before, how were you supposed to have a relationship with God? Through who? The priest, the preacher, the minister. But if we're all supposed to have a personal relationship with God, does that make religion more democratic? We all can do religion however we want, because I don't need you to speak to God. I can have my own relationship with God. And that makes religion more democratic. It becomes the democratization of religion. Make sense? Yeah. Okay. Furthermore, you had an increase in Native American Christianization. And how did natives feel about that? Were they happy about that? Not so much. Okay, so that's Unit 1, folks.